HVAC 360, episode number 1, Communication. Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of HVAC 360. I'm your host, Matt Nelson. And for those of you who have been paying slight attention, you may have already heard this episode a little bit differently. It originally was aired on my Building Chatter podcast back in January of 2010. But I've taken it back, I've cleaned it up, dusted it off, added a new ending to it, and hopefully it'll contain a little bit more information for you to learn from. Without that, I'm going to now transition into the original episode for communication. Now, when I was sitting down thinking about topics that I could do for my very first episode, communication popped to the top of the list. I think it's very critical. I know most of you are probably thinking to yourself, Matt, you said that, you're going to cover technical stuff on this podcast, but I really can't find anything more important than communication. Every time I get a chance to talk to a young person who's going off to engineering school or a younger engineer, I try to stress the importance of communication. So what I'm going to talk about today is the two basic types. I'm going to break it down into two basic types: nonverbal communication and verbal communication. And, just give you my 2 cents worth on those. So first off, I'm going to start with nonverbal communication. Let's talk about the way you look. Most people get judged within the first 5 seconds of when they meet another person. It really doesn't take you long to get that first impression. So you want to make sure that it's the right kind of impression for you. You want to make sure that you dress nice and that it's appropriate the way you're dressing. I had a couple months ago, I had an interview with a gentleman, a very, very bright kid. But when he came into the interview, it's, the first thing that I noticed, he looked like he literally just got out of bed. His tie was wrinkled, his pants were wrinkled, he didn't have a suit coat, his hair was all messed up. And again, this is a bright kid. In talking to him through the interview, I'm like, do you have a jacket? Is this part of a suit? He's like, well, it was on the floor. I didn't want to, it was even more wrinkled. I didn't want to wear it. And I'm like, you got to have a professional attitude, a professional dress, a professional demeanor. You can't look like you've slept in these clothes. Getting wrinkled clothes, it's not okay. You really want to be looking like a professional. You want to have that first impression in an interview, whether that's for a client or for a job interview. You want to be able to fit into a team, and part of that is being, looking like everybody else. So there's certain standards that the industry has that, sometimes get laxed depending upon the size of the group that you work with. But there again, I cannot stress looking your best is going to project a great professional image. I kind of liken this, and again, we talk about professionalism. Being a professional engineer in our field is like being a doctor, is like being a lawyer. We're a profession, and we're professionals. Could you imagine if you went to your doctor's office and he just had ratty clothes on, and it just, you just couldn't trust any advice that he'd give you. A lawyer, you'd be like, where did you get your law degree? Some crackerjack university. It just didn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense. And I think you'd feel very uncomfortable taking advice, legal or medical advice from those type of professionals. You want to be able to dress the part, dress like a professional. The second way is the way that you act. Remain calm, have eye contact, You want to have that kind of personality. You want to be able to be excited about talking. You just don't want to be, falling asleep and, just rambling on, and it's just not that good. And you want to be able to talk and keep your energy up and be dynamic and change up your voice a little bit. You want to be passionate. You want to be able to transmit that kind of attitude to whoever you're talking. They'll be much more engaged. They'll listen to you harder, and they'll want to talk to you. It's the same thing with, and there's certain mannerisms that you can do. If you have like tics or just ask somebody to watch you and tell you if you have any sort of things that stand out like that. Like, if you're always like tugging on your ear or you cross your arms in front of your chest, it just, have them give you some, feedback on that. That can help you out a lot. And whether you're presenting to, a group at work or presenting to somebody, a client, or again, for an interview, it's of critical importance. Another example. I interviewed somebody a couple of weeks ago, and I know this is mostly interview examples, but I can't help it. The person was so nervous. I mean, he visibly shaking. And which was understandable. And I tried to calm him down, and it helped a little bit. By the end, I shook his hand, and his hand was shaking, and I'm like, to go through the whole process, and I don't know if it was that important to him, that critical, but you need to be able to calm yourself down, to not look visibly, shaking or anxious or what have you. Yet still you want to be able to remain calm in the body, but still be dynamic and passionate when you're sitting there talking and answering questions. So that's a little bit about the nonverbal. Verbal, it's kind of a couple of topics that I want to talk about. I want to talk about asking questions, knowing your audience, and interacting with others. Asking questions. I can't tell you how important that is to being a good engineer. A couple of things that couple axioms that you can stick in your notebook is that really everything that you need to know is in somebody else's head, and you just have to ask the right question to be able to unlock that. So the more questions you know, or the more questions that you ask, the more you can find out about a specific thing. Also, when you're asking questions, you're really in control of a conversation. You're driving the boat. You're really, you're the one in charge. And let me kind of give you an example of asking questions, because it's critical to know when not to stop. And really just I can't emphasize enough just to ask questions. Because if you stop asking questions at any point, whether it be during an interview or when you're talking to a client, and you just don't ask that next question, you don't get this vital piece of information that really would, make or break your design. We had a situation where we were doing a tenant fit out in a high-rise building. And this particular job was, working with a data center. Now, we were, to cool this unit, we were using the condenser water loop, which is, it's fine. The building says, yeah, you got plenty of water, everything like that. Come to find out that they shut it off seasonally. So here we are with a pump and a unit that can't get cool, and so it overheats. If it was just, if we just kept asking the questions, just made sure that we were totally understood. I mean, nobody's necessarily going to volunteer the key piece of information. You got to know what it is, and you got to know, how to ask for it. So, there again, from our mistakes, you have to ask questions. And there's a multitude of benefit to asking questions. Also, you got to know your audience. all the time I think I get, stopped, and I'm guilty of this one. So it's kind of, do as I say, not as I do. But answering a question as an engineer, you would, or somebody who's very technical, your first instinct is to really give a long, drawn-out answer. You want to be as specific and exact as possible. And when I get asked by some of my supervisors, tell me about this, and I just go into this long, rambling explanation, and they're like, okay, I really wanted a yes or no, answer here, and you gave me this long, this long dissertation on exactly what the right answer was. You got to know exactly, if you can't answer it concisely, then just, be brief about your answer. They can always come back and ask you more questions, but try to be as concise as you can. And again, know your audience. If it's a non-technical person or a person that's not necessarily knows all the information you do, try to keep it in their terms. Don't be too technical. And this is something that you probably already know, but I just want to reiterate it because it's it's one of the pitfalls, at least that I have, to be overly explanatory when I try to give an answer, because I want to be as exact and as precise as I can, but the goal is not to be precise, it's to be concise. And if you can't be concise, again, be brief, please, be brief. Interacting with others is another crucial nonverbal skill. As an engineer or a contractor, you need to know how to interact with architects and owners, and it's critical because there's certain times when, especially, and I'll give an example of an architect. An architect, he had this vision of this grand lobby, and the engineer kind of said, okay, well, you know what? I was going to put some baseboard heat around the perimeter because it's, the big glass walls that are 40 feet high, but he didn't want to see these fin tube. It was just going to mess up his design. So we took them out, and we're trying to do it with air, blowing down from overhead. And, of course, what we thought was going to happen happened. That room was constantly cold. It never warmed up. And it was a nightmare. And that same kind of building had a vestibule, and they were like, you know what, we're gonna stick somebody in this vestibule for security purposes, and they're gonna be in there. So we went through all these exercises and developed this really complex control scheme. What ends up happening is that it didn't work out perfect. So they just pulled the security guard out of that vestibule, moved him back, and you know what? I mean, we're like, that's what we thought would happen. I mean, you just don't try to put a round peg in a square hole. It's not going to fit. So it's important that you understand your design and that you really try to stand behind it, and that you be able to work with an architect, and that you don't necessarily bend to his will. Sometimes that's hard, but again, stand up for yourself. Otherwise, you're just you're the one who is going to end up solving the problem later. I mean, it's when it was cold, they came back to us and said, "Hey, why is it cold?" And we're like, "Well, you didn't let us put in that fin tube." And they're like, "Well, you didn't you say this would happen." So you really have to be strong and persevere when you're talking about knowing when not to compromise in those kinds of situations. And on the flip side, you want to make sure that you're not arrogant. I've run into engineers time and time again who really think they're the cat's meow, and a lot of times what it ends up being is that the engineer is in the wrong. He hasn't done his homework. He hasn't really done his job. We're talking about a problem that's occurring, and they get belligerent. They think they're above everybody else, and they're not going to bend, and they're not going to say they're wrong, and they're just making the whole situation difficult and uncomfortable. And realistically, when it boils down, like I said, it was about them not doing their job. So understand that. Don't be arrogant, but to kind of help you in that regard, do your job. Be thorough. And that obviously when you know your job and when you've done the work and you're prepared for whatever you're doing, those types of situations can be alleviated. So that was kind of my synopsis of nonverbal and verbal communications. So one of the things that I'm going to leave you with, or actually two of the things, is to improve on this. Things that you want to do, you want to be able to practice this. So whether you do it in front of a mirror, or maybe videotape yourself, or record yourself, do that. At least that would give you some feedback, because without feedback, you're not going to get any better. Better than that, is really, speaking or doing something, presenting something, in front of a family member, in front of a friend. Get that feedback from a real live person to be able to kind of get that, how am I acting? Am I saying or ah too much? And the third place to do it is just to get in touch with an organization. One of the great organizations that I've recently got involved with is Toastmasters. Toastmasters is an excellent organization, basically from the standpoint that you get lots of practice. There's plenty of chapters out there, and it's an international organization. I would strongly suggest and urge that you get involved and at least go through some of the basic parts of Toastmasters. In lieu of that, look for other organizations that you can get involved in. One of the other organizations that I'm involved in is H3 in the United States. Even though it's an international organization, it's primarily U.S. based. But just getting involved in the leadership there, talking to large groups, talking to other people, leading discussions. It's good experience, because the more you practice, one of the premises of Toastmasters is really you need to practice, because the more you practice, when you don't get the practice, you get kind of rusty. So to be able to keep that rust off, you constantly have to be speaking in front of other people, talking, reacting. You have to use those skills. It's just like exercise. So, other than practice, I would strongly urge you. There's a number of resources out there. Whether you like to read books, whether you listen to books, like I do, I would strongly suggest that you pick up a couple books and just use that as some continuing education for your career. Because again, this is all stemming for professionals, and I really want you to be the best professional that you can. So if you hone your nonverbal skills, you hone your verbal skills, you're really going to start to accelerate in your career, and you're going to be doing better. You're going to be having better projects. You're going to be enjoying what you do more and more. All right, now we're back from the original episode. I hope you enjoyed it. A couple of things that I want to be able to add to it. In kind of reviewing it, freshening it up a little bit from when it originally aired back in January of 2010. I'm going to add a couple of things to the blog post over at buildingx.co. You can find that, or even if you take a look at HVAC360radio.com, that'll lead you to the same place. But I'm going to add a few more links for some of the books that I'm going to recommend, and hopefully that will be of some interest to you. So, a couple of things on the nonverbal. Some of the things that I forgot to mention when I was doing that. There's a book by John Malloy, and I'll get you to the details there. I mean, it's been out of been out of print for a long time, but you can always go to Amazon, get an old copy. And the one nice thing about this, and you're like, if it's out of print, what good is it going to do me as far as fashion sense goes? Well, it's not really about fashion sense. It's not about a fashion show. It's about perception and people's perception of how you dress. And that really hasn't changed in a long, long time. I mean, there's certain things like collar types and things like that that may have gone out of vogue and back into vogue, but there's certain fundamentals that you need to master, and it's so simple to be able to get those, learn those, and be able to present yourself in that professional light. Ultimately, the rule is that you want to be able to dress to the position that you want to go to. If you want to be the president, if you want to be the principal, if you want to be the owner of the company, then you need to be able to dress like the owner of the company. If you want to be, a big zero, you want to be a hobo, then you can dress like a hobo. But I know you're not that type of person. I know you're looking to improve yourself, and I think that. Even just kind of breezing through this and a few things that their studies have shown are really going to shed a lot of light into your professional life. As far as body language goes, I'm gonna put a link to a body language book that I read a little bit ago. It's very fascinating. Just some simple things about. Especially in an interview, when you cross your arms and you're closed off to that interviewer. If you want to show that you're really interested in something that somebody's saying, you want to have your arms not folded. You want to have them open, and you want to lean slightly toward that person that you're listening to. You want to give eye contact, occasional eye contact. You want to have the head nods. Those are some of the things that you want to be able to portray, that, you're interested in what they're saying, that, you're leaning forward, leaning forward with an arm on the table maybe, those type of things. That shows interest. You don't want to, the handshake. The handshake is very critical. And in reading the book, it's very interesting. Just even if you have the palm up, the palm down, that means two different things. And it's very important just to have a nice firm handshake. You don't want to have the person have to reach for your handshake, and you don't want to invade their personal space either. In that same vein. Also, with the presentations, you want to be able to not dominate the conversation. You want to be able to have this, and this kind of goes more for the interview, but plays a part in a lot of what we do when we talk about verbal communication. Well, actually, that kind of goes into verbal communication. But don't talk so long. Listen to other people. Have it go back and forth when you're having a conversation. I can't tell you the number of times where I've had an interviewee just start to dominate the interview, just because and I could see it in their eyes. They're like, if I tell you this one more piece of information, then you're going to be, you can't help but hire me for the position. And it's like, if I can't converse with you without you dominating the conversation, then I don't think that I want to hire you regardless of what you're going to say or not. Turning the tides on the questions, and how I stressed how absolutely critical those questions are. That really hasn't changed, and I don't anticipate that is going to change in the short term. Because one of the things I'll add to that is that you want to be able to prepare for the interview. If somebody asks you, "Have I seen your website?" That's like a bare minimum. If you're going to go interview somebody, if you're going to go talk to somebody, you want to be prepared. You want to know as much about that person and that person's company as you can. If you don't, that's a serious flaw. You want to be able to do that. the internet and the availability of information, that just puts everything at your fingertips right now, and there's no excuse except for laziness. And obviously, that's not a good cop out. There's no excuse that you shouldn't get all the information that you can about the person and company that you're talking with. Also, you want to be able to anticipate questions. This goes not only for interviews, this goes for meetings. Never go into a meeting where you can't anticipate exactly what's going on. If you're called into a meeting and you don't have any idea what it's going to be about, that's a bad sign. You're probably going to get your butt handed to you just about the time that you sit down. So clearly you want to be able to be prepared and anticipate those questions. Interviews come with standard questions. There's always what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And plan it out. There's certain things, know what you want to answer, right away. You hesitate maybe and go, you know what? That's a good question. You might compliment the interviewer, and then answer it the way that you want. Don't sit there and try to think of an answer on the spot. Know what and be able to anticipate some of the standard questions. Look at your resume. I mean, have you been just jumping around on jobs for a long time? That's not a good sign. You need to be able to explain that. If there's something in particular that jumps out at you, if you were laid off for a particular reason, you might want to have an explanation of exactly why that happened. Don't necessarily volunteer that information, but know that if the question comes up, that you're going to be ready with a response, and that you are prepared, and that by showing that you're prepared, that's going to show favorably on you. Interacting with others, that's critical. Actually, I'm just in the middle of reading a book, and I'll post that information. Never Eat Alone is the title of the book, and it is just it's pretty amazing. Realizing, you talk about goal setting, and one of the things you can do during goal setting is actually attach people that that could help you achieve that goal, or people that you may not even know, but try to find out, somebody who knows that person. Anyway, networking is very critical. Regardless of where you are in your career, a strong network is going to save you. Being able to communicate with people, being able to get information from somebody, or even help somebody out. Being able to do that give and take. Not only when you need it, you can get some information from somebody, but when somebody else needs it, you'll be able to provide that information and have that good feeling go along with you. So. All right, that was the recap. What I'd like to add to the episode. So that was my refresher on that particular episode. So I'm just going to lead it off with the same kind of things that we want to talk about. That I'm glad you were listening to episode number 1, and I hope you enjoyed it. If this is your first time, well, I'm glad you found us. If this is your the second time listening to the same episode, well, I appreciate you sticking all the way through. Again, we are on iTunes, on HVAC 360. If you like the episode and want to share it with a friend, go ahead and do that. If you liked it enough to leave it a review, I'd certainly appreciate that. If you have any comments or suggestions on future podcast episodes, I can be reached at matt@buildingx.co. That's matt@buildingx.co. Or if you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle is @buildingx. And of course, all this information can be found and played through the little audio player I've located in the episodes at my blog at buildingx.co. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. So until next time, remember, know what you build and share what you know.